She arrived at the edge of the ranch just as the sun dipped low over the American plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and burnt orange. The long dirt road behind her told a silent story of miles walked and hopes tested. Dust clung to the hem of her faded coat, and her boots were worn thin from travel. Still, she stood straight when she reached the gate, lifting her chin as if courage alone could steady her tired body. Her name was Clara, and all she carried now fit into a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder. The ranch stretched wide and quiet, fences running like lines drawn by patience itself. Horses grazed in the distance, their movements calm, unbothered by the world beyond the land. Clara paused for a moment, taking it all in. She hadn't planned to stop here, not exactly. But hunger had a way of changing plans, and so did exhaustion. More than that, something about this place felt solid, unchanging in a way she desperately needed. Luke, the rancher, noticed her from the porch before she reached the house. He was a tall man with weathered features, the kind shaped by years of sun, wind, and responsibility. His eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but with curiosity. Strangers were rare out here, and women traveling alone were rarer still. He waited as she approached, leaning against a wooden post, saying nothing. Clara stopped a few steps away, careful to keep her hands visible. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice was calm, though it cost her effort to keep it that way. "Any kind. I can clean, cook, help with animals. I don't ask for much." Luke studied her in silence. He noticed the strength in her hands, the quiet determination in her eyes. This wasn't someone running from trouble, this was someone who had already survived it. "Work's hard here," he said finally. "Long days. Early mornings. I'm not afraid of hard work," Clara replied quickly. "I just need a chance." For a moment, the only sound between them was the wind moving through dry grass. Then Luke stepped aside and nodded toward the barn. "You can start by helping in the stables," he said. "There's a bucket inside." Relief washed over Clara's face, though she tried not to show it too openly. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than the words suggested. As she walked toward the barn, Luke watched her go. Something about the way she carried herself, tired but unbroken, stirred a feeling he hadn't known in years. The ranch had been quiet for too long, filled with routine but lacking warmth. Almost without realizing it, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "You'll find more than wages here," he said. Clara paused, turning slightly, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Before she could respond, Luke had already turned back toward the house. She shook her head gently and continued on, unaware that with her first step into the stables, both their lives had already begun to change. Morning came early on the ranch, announced by the low nickering of horses and the pale light creeping through the windows of the small room Clara had been given above the barn. She woke before she was called, muscles aching from the unfamiliar labor of the day before, yet her mind felt clearer than it had in months. For the first time in a long while, she had slept without fear of being forced to move on at dawn. She washed quickly, tied her hair back, and went downstairs ready to work. The stables smelled of hay, leather, and animals, honest, grounding scents that made her feel useful. Clara moved from stall to stall, cleaning, brushing, and refilling water troughs with quiet focus. She spoke softly to the horses, calming them with gentle hands and steady words. Luke noticed this as he passed through, surprised by how easily the animals responded to her. Horses, he believed, recognized truth in people, and they seemed to trust her instinctively. By midday, the sun was high and unforgiving. Sweat dampened Clara's shirt, but she did not slow her pace. When Luke offered her a break, she shook her head. "Let me finish the fence line first," she said. "It won't take long." There was pride in her voice, not arrogance, just a need to prove that she belonged here. Luke said nothing more, but something tightened in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he admired determination until he saw it in her. Lunch was simple: bread, stew, and strong coffee at the long wooden table in the farmhouse kitchen. Clara sat carefully at the edge of her chair, eating quietly, grateful for every bite. Luke watched her across the table, noticing how she thanked him again before returning her bowl, as if kindness was something she didn't expect to receive twice. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it felt thoughtful, heavy with things neither of them were ready to say. Days turned into a steady rhythm. Clara learned the ranch quickly, memorizing the land as if it were a map she had always known. She repaired loose boards, helped deliver feed, and even learned to ride when Luke saw her watching the horses with quiet longing. When she laughed, softly, almost surprised by the sound, it carried across the open fields and seemed to settle into the soil itself. The ranch, once lonely, felt alive again. At night, Clara returned to her small room, exhausted but fulfilled. She wrote in a worn notebook, recording each day as if afraid it might disappear. She told herself not to hope for too much. This was work, she reminded herself. Temporary. Still, when she looked out at the stars stretching endlessly above the land, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Luke, too, found himself changing. He caught himself listening for her footsteps, noticing her absence when she wasn't nearby. The ranch had been a place of duty since loss had hollowed his life. Now, without effort or intention, Clara was filling the quiet spaces with purpose. She had come asking for work, but with every passing day, it became clear she was giving far more than labor. She was giving life back to the land, and to him. The change in the weather came without warning. The morning had been clear and calm, but by afternoon, dark clouds gathered low on the horizon, rolling in fast and heavy. Luke felt the shift in the air and knew a storm was coming, one of the sudden, violent kinds that could undo weeks of hard work in a single hour. He called out orders, moving quickly to secure equipment and guide the cattle toward safer ground. Clara didn't hesitate. She pulled on her jacket and followed him, her heart pounding but her steps steady. The wind rose sharply, whipping dust and leaves into the air. Thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to shake the ground beneath their feet. Rain followed in sheets, cold and relentless. Together, they worked in near silence, shouting only when necessary, their movements instinctive and urgent. One of the younger horses panicked, rearing and pulling against its rope. Without thinking, Clara rushed forward, speaking calmly despite the chaos. She placed a firm hand on the animal's neck, her voice cutting through the storm like a steady line of light. Slowly, the horse stilled, its trembling easing. Luke watched in awe, rain streaking down his face as he realized how brave she truly was, not reckless but unwavering. As the storm reached its peak, a section of the old fence gave way. Luke ran toward it, but his foot slipped in the mud, sending him hard to the ground. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and sudden. Before he could wave her off, Clara was already beside him, fear flashing in her eyes. "Don't move," she said, her voice firm. She helped him to his feet, bearing his weight as they struggled back toward the barn, the storm raging around them. By the time the clouds began to break, both of them were soaked and exhausted. They stood under the shelter of the barn roof, breathing hard, listening as the rain softened into a gentle drizzle. The land around them glistened, washed clean, as if the storm had stripped away more than just dust. Luke finally spoke, his voice rough. "You didn't have to do all that." Clara looked at him, surprised. "Yes, I did," she said simply. "This place matters." Something in her words opened a door Luke had kept closed for years. He leaned against the wooden beam, the weight of memory pressing down on him. For the first time, he spoke of his past, of the family he had lost, of the silence that followed, of how the ranch became both his refuge and his burden. Clara listened without interrupting, her expression soft, understanding. She didn't offer empty comfort, only presence. When he finished, she took a slow breath. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she said quietly. She spoke then of her own road, betrayal, grief, and the constant motion that left no room to heal. Her voice trembled once, but she did not look away. The space between them felt different now, filled with shared truth. Luke met her eyes and said the words she hadn't realized she needed to hear. "You're safe here." As the sun broke through the clouds, casting light over the wet fields, Clara felt something settle deep inside her. The storm had passed, and in its wake, trust had taken root, strong, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. After the storm, the ranch seemed to breathe differently, as if the land itself had been renewed. The air was crisp, carrying the clean scent of wet earth and fresh grass. Mornings came softly now, with sunlight spilling over the fields and birds returning to the fences. Clara moved through her days with a calm confidence, no longer feeling like a guest passing through. She belonged to the rhythm of the ranch, to the steady work and quiet purpose it demanded. Luke's leg healed slowly, but Clara insisted on taking on the heavier tasks without complaint. She rose before dawn, prepared meals, and managed the stables with practiced ease. Luke watched her with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper he hadn't yet named. The loneliness that had once followed him like a shadow had begun to fade, replaced by conversations at breakfast, shared glances across the fields, and laughter that surprised them both. As weeks turned into months, the ranch flourished. Repairs were completed, livestock grew healthier, and the land responded to the care it was given. Neighbors began to notice the change. They commented on the renewed life in the place, on how the ranch no longer felt forgotten. Clara accepted their praise with humility, but Luke knew the truth: she was the heart of this transformation. One quiet evening, Clara stood at the edge of the property, watching the sky shift into deep shades of violet and gold. Luke joined her, leaning on the fence beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Finally, Luke broke the silence. "You came here asking for work," he said thoughtfully. "I never expected you'd change everything." Clara smiled faintly. "I never expected to stay." He turned to her then, meeting her eyes with an honesty that left no room for doubt. "You don't have to leave," he said. "Not if you don't want to." Emotion tightened her throat. She thought of the road she had traveled, of nights spent wondering where she would end up. She thought of the safety she felt here, of the trust that had grown between them, steady and unforced. "This place gave me more than a job," she said. Softly. "It gave me a future." Luke nodded, his voice low but certain. "You'll find more than wages here," he said again, the words carrying new meaning now. In the days that followed, their bond deepened naturally, built on shared work and mutual respect. There was no rush, no grand declarations, only the quiet understanding that they were stronger together than they had ever been alone. Clara began making plans not just for the next day, but for seasons ahead. Luke found himself imagining the ranch filled with warmth and life, no longer just a memory of loss. One morning, as the sun rose over the open land, Clara stood on the porch beside Luke, her hand resting lightly against his. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, full of promise. She had come seeking wages, believing survival was all she deserved. Instead, she found purpose, belonging, and love. On that ranch, beneath the white American sky, two broken journeys met, and became a shared path forward, rooted not in necessity, but in choice.